So, in my experience, the examples that are given to you in the book are a little complicated. So, I'm going to try to explain those terms a little bit more simply by using a more simple example. And this is an example of a quantitative frequency table. So, first of all, the word quantitative is just another word for numerical. So anytime that you are dealing with data that is numerical, that is what makes it quantitative. So for example, let's say instead of these numbers, so like this is a table of people's height. I just realized that we did the cardinal rule of not saying exactly what these heights are in, like inches, feet, whatever, but that's okay. Instead of height, let's say that the category was types of pets, right? So then you've got like cats, dogs, please excuse my crappy handwriting, I'm kind of doing this quick, and so on and so forth. That wouldn't be a quantitative frequency table because it involves categories instead of numbers. So the fact that this table is made out of numbers is what makes it a quantitative table. So then the next word, so we've got quantitative, and then frequency is just another way that we say in statistics for how many times a value occurs. So how frequent is that value? So for example, here, the frequency, like you see that one person has a height of 139 inches, two people have a height of 145, two people have a height of 150, etc., etc. So quantitative frequency just refers to how many times does a particular numerical value occur? Like how frequent is it? So now I've kind of added to our table here, I've added my own little columns for cumulative frequency and relative frequency. So cumulative frequency just means, like, think of that as a running total. So for example, if you look at row 1, you have one person that has a height of 139. We fill in a table from the top to the bottom. Typically, I don't want to say always, but in most cases we do. So far, we have only dealt with this first row in the table. So that means that the cumulative frequency so far is just 1 because we've only dealt with one person whose height was 100, well, I'm assuming it's a person, who knows. Oh, actually 139 inches wouldn't be it depends on what the unit is, I guess, because I don't know. So I'm just going to say people because it's easier. So the cumulative frequency at this point is just 1 because we've talked about one thing, person, whatever, that has a height of 139, whatever that unit is. If we go to the next column on the chart, you have two people or things or whatever that have a height of 145. So you had one person or whatever at that height plus two more things at that height. So that means that your cumulative frequency, what you're running total so far, is going to be 3 because you've dealt with 3 objects, things, whatever. So you can probably see where this is going now. So I'll pause for a second and give you a chance to think. If we go to the next row, what number is going to go here? And I'm sure you've guessed it right. So we had 3. Then we put in another 2 because we had 2 people that had a height of 150. So now our cumulative frequency is 5. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the chart so that you can just kind of see and check yourself to make sure that we get that. So that cumulative frequency is, again, just keeping a running total of how many you have so far. Okay, so next up, we've got the term relative frequency. And when you might think of it as like a real life example of when I would use, the word relative outside of the math classroom, I might say something like, hey, I'm I'm a terrible singer, but relative to my husband, I'm not too bad. Okay, so relative, basically you're thinking of that as making a comparison. And in the case of relative frequency, what you are comparing, so you can kind of think of it as this: how frequent a value is compared to the total. So in this case, if we go back up to our table, I'm going to erase all of this. So I'm going to look at my first value. So the first value on the table was 139. There is one person, thing, whatever that is, that has a height of 139. So you're going to take that frequency of 1 and you're going to divide it by the total frequency. Okay, which once we did the cumulative frequency, we realized that we have 10 numbers in the table, right? There were 10 different values from that frequency column. So we're going to do 1 divided by 10. So you're saying how frequent is a height of 139 relative or compared to the total number of values. And the way that we express that varies for depending on what you need that number for. So sometimes we just leave it as the decimal form, which in this case would be 0.1. We almost never leave it as a fraction. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we do not. So you can just leave it as a decimal form, but frequently we also use a percent. And so the way that you would take that decimal and convert it to a percent, thinking back to old school, like middle school, you take that decimal and you move it 2 places to the right. So 0.1 is the same thing as 10%. So it's basically saying how much of all the values on the table are 139. So if we wanted to do the relative frequency for the next number on our chart, so we have 145 is our next value. The frequency at which it occurred was twice. So we're going to compare that number. So 2 divided by the total, the cumulative frequency, how many numbers are in the whole table, gives you a decimal of 0.2, which is going to be 20%. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for a second and just fill this in. All right, so I've filled in all of those decimals and percents. And here's the key to knowing whether or not you've actually done it correctly. So all those decimals should add up to one whole number. So 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep. So if you add all those decimals together, you get 1.0. And all the percents should add up to 100%, which in this case they do. So that is how we know that we've calculated that part of the percent. There is another part of the table that was given to you in SmartBook that does a relative frequency just based on how many values you've done so far. And to be honest, you don't really need that. I think it's overcomplicating for the problems we're going to do for the purpose of this course. These are all you really need to know is how to do is just knowing the difference between cumulative and relative. But without doing there's a more complicated version of relative frequency, which again, you don't need to do for the purposes of this course. I hope this helps. Please let me know if it doesn't, because I would be glad to explain it in a different way.